Welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal, Discoveries from the Dark, the radio show where we dive into the shadows of Saskatchewan, and sometimes across Canada, to see what lies within. I'm your host, K.D. Kulpa, and I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher based here in Regina. Tonight, in honor of Halloween, I'm very excited to welcome back Melanie Cole. She's agreed to chat with us and potentially across 2 episodes again if we get talking like we did last time about the mysterious axe murderer that occurred in Saskatoon. One that still hasn't been solved. So grab your Halloween candy and get comfortable as we dive into the clues behind a brutal crime and mystery that left everyone guessing. All right. So thanks for coming back on for the Halloween special kind of thing.
Thank you for having me.
I know we talked a lot about kind of different true crime stuff the last time you were here. Well, we focused on the beachy skull
Yep.
or in Robert Courthouse. So yeah, I
Yeah.
guess, do you want to let us know what you're here to talk about today? Even though I know, but let our
You
listeners
know.
know what you're here to talk
Well,
about
time
today.
for the big reveal.
Yeah.
So today I'm going to be telling you about the Bungalow Axe Murder of Saskatoon in 1925 that happened on Christmas night.
Ooh, even Christmas
hmm
night. Yikes.
Extra spooky.
Awesome. So yeah, where do you want to get started, I guess, talking about it?
Well, it starts with a phone call. It was about 10, between 10:20 and 10:40 p.m., according to the woman who was operating the telephone line. So there was a Saskatoon telephone operator named Claire Emer, and she thinks it was about 10:20, 10:40 p.m. on Christmas Day in 1925, and she gets a call on the long distance line. And she hears a voice asking her to send the police to 545 4th Avenue North in Saskatoon. And when she tries to give them the number for the police, the voice on the call just says, "I'm bound. Something terrible has happened. Please send the police." So she does what she's asked. And she kept returning to long distance line after she made the call to kept trying to like clear the line. And
Right.
um, the caller never hung up. And she could hear the voice just saying, "Oh dear," repeatedly whenever she went on the line. Yeah. So Constable Flavel from the Saskatoon Police, he reported that he got the call to go to the 4th Avenue home at about 10:30. And these are all estimates by everyone. So the timeline is sketchy. We're not totally sure, but he thinks it was 10:30. He got the call. He walked to the house and he arrived, he thinks, at about 10:40 p.m. He stated that there were no lights on that he could see at the front of the house, but he could see a light on in the back. So he went around the house. He tried to peer in the window on his way around. Didn't see anything, and opened the door to the back, like veranda porch. You know, like how they have the
Oh,
sunroom
okay.
sometimes in the back of the house.
Yep.
So that door was open. So he walked through there and then knocked on the back door, and he heard a voice asking him to come in, and that door was unlocked too. And so he walked in and it led straight into the kitchen where he found a woman standing with her hands behind her back, sobbing, hysterical, dressed only in a nightgown. And her hands were tied in a reef knot with a strip of material from like a towel or linen behind her back. And
Oh.
so, yeah, she's just completely hysterical. So he gets her hands untied and asks her what happened. And all she could say was that she thought she saw some kind of flash or there was a thud and then nothing. Later, he said she told him something about a man with a flashlight, but that was like well over a month later, and that was the first time he'd ever reported it. So, memory,
Yeah,
I don't,
hard to say.
maybe.
Yeah.
So he went into the bedroom at the front of the house, and that's where he found her husband. So her husband,
Oh.
James Eli Johnson, was lying on his back in bed. His face was covered in blood and just lying there with his hands on his stomach, face covered in blood in bed. So he went back out, asked Laura which doctor she wanted him to call.
Yeah.
And she said Dr. Monroe, that was someone that James Johnson and Dr. Monroe had served in the war together. They were close friends, and he'd always told her if there's an accident, that's who he wanted working on him. So he's like, no problem. So he calls the police station. He asks them to send more officers. He asks them to send the chief, and he asks them to call Dr. Monroe and send him over. So they're sitting there waiting. He returns to Mrs. Johnson. She's sitting in the bathroom, and he shows him that she's also tied at the ankles with the same reef knots with the piece of material. So he gets those untied, and he asked her again what happened. And she repeated the same story, that flash of light, saying she came to in the living room. She said she only remembered, she wasn't sure if she was on the Chesterfield or on the floor or maybe sliding off onto the floor. All she knew that she kind of came to being on her knees and struggling to get up. So, yeah, so it wasn't like she came to and figured out where she was. Like the first thing she remembers was kind of being on her knees, not sure if she was on the couch or on the floor, and just trying to get up.
Yeah.
She managed to shimmy her way to the bathroom, where she turned on the light switch with her head. And then she made her way to the kitchen and got the phone off the hook with her teeth. And then she went back to the bathroom and managed to get a toothbrush, clenched it between her teeth, went back to the kitchen, and after quite a few tries, managed to dial 0 for long distance. Like it was one of those old rotary stuff. So she used the toothbrush
Oh my
to try
goodness,
and get
that
it
would
to
be
dial 0
hard.
for the operator. Yeah, so it took her a few tries, but she got it to dial 0, which is why she couldn't hang up the phone. She'd managed to get it off the receiver,
Oh.
but she couldn't hang it back up. And so she talked into the receiver and asked the operator to call the police. And that's where her story ends when the police officer arrived. So the next police officer was Sergeant Samuel Quinn. He arrived next. He knocked at the front door, which was locked, and Constable Flavel let him in. At this point, most lights were on, including the one in the bedroom. And after he saw Mr. Johnson, he also called the police station to be like, is Dr. Monroe on his way? Like, we need the doctor now. And not long after that, the chief and Dr. Monroe arrived. So they never really, in any of the newspapers, stated about what time this was.
So hard to say.
That's where things kind of get a little more gray as well. So Dr. Monroe, he goes into their bedroom. It's a small bedroom. The bed is pushed up tight to the right side of the wall, and James is lying on the outside half of the bed.
Okay.
So she would have been on the side closest to the wall, and he was on the outside half of the bed. He's lying on his back. The blankets were pulled up to his armpits. His hands were resting on his stomach, and he had 8 wounds on his head. There were 5 major, 3 minor. So the big ones are actually on the left frontal portions of his head, which if he was lying on the outside, it doesn't make a ton of sense that they'd be on the left side of his head, unless maybe his head was turned. I was trying to like visualize in my head today. I was like, he might have had his head turned to the right, and that would have given them the option. But there were 2 really large wounds on the left side of his foreheads. They're about parallel to each other. They're about 3/4 of an inch apart, and they stretched from his eyebrow up to the vertex of his head, which is like the crown of your head. So they went like all the way up his forehead. Yeah, and one was about 4 inches in length, and the other was about 3.5. And they were both so deep they were literally oozing brain matter. Yeah, they were deep. They were like an inch and a half deep into his head. Most of the blood was on his forehead and like high up on his cheeks, and it was really black and congealed and thick, and his features were swollen. There was a cut from like the left lobe of his nose down to his lip. It didn't even pierce the gum underneath, but like cut from his nose to his lip. And then there was a big, what's the word I'm looking for? There was a fracture to the right side of his head, like a V-shaped laceration on the right side of his head that caused a depressed fracture of approximately 1.5 by 1.5 inches. The pillows were saturated with blood. There's blood on the sheets. The blood splashed right up on the south and west walls. It was on the dressing table 2 feet from the bed. There was a small puddle on the floor next to the bed. Like,
oh my goodness, a lot of blood.
Yeah, it was a lot of blood. So Dr. Monroe estimated that these blows occurred about a half hour to an hour and 15 minutes from when he arrived, which doesn't make a lot of sense mathematically.
Yeah.
If the call came in between 10:20 to 10:40 and Flavel thinks he got the call at 10:30, arrived at 10:40, and then had to call everyone, like I'm assuming it would have taken him 20 to 30 minutes to get there, so
Well,
already
yeah.
30 minutes doesn't make sense because Constable Flavel is already there.
Yeah.
So, but we'll take it at face value and say, like, these are fresh. These are
Yeah.
very fresh wounds. Probably within we'll say like an hour and a half to 2 hours would be maybe a little bit more accurate. We'll
Yeah.
see. So the police immediately did a search of the house, and they found an axe with what appeared to be a blood smear on the blade in the coal bin in the basement. They also found the family dog shut up in the den where the Johnsons had put him to bed for the night. He'd
Oh,
never barked. He never barked when Constable Flavel arrived, when the sergeant arrived. Um,
that's
and
surprising.
yeah, and Laura Johnson said she didn't recall any noise from him all evening, not before they went to bed, not after they went to bed. And according to her, sometimes he was an excellent guard dog and he barked at anyone that was coming by the house, and sometimes he didn't bark at all, didn't pay any attention. So unreliable narrator in the
Well,
dog,
yeah.
apparently.
No
Apparently.
doubt.
The rest of the house was really orderly and clean, except for a few small changes. So, like in the main bedroom where the Johnsons had been sleeping and the murder took place, there was a linen closet. And on top of that, the Johnsons both of them had tossed their clothes up on top of the linen closet before they went to bed.
Okay.
And Mr. Johnson's pants had the pockets turned out.
Oh,
Yeah, so there was any money that might have been in his pockets was gone,
was gone.
as
Yeah.
well as his railway mail service keys. So
Oh,
he was a railway mail clerk, and his keys were never located. They never found them. They looked all over the house. They looked at his job. Keys were never found, and pockets in his pants turned out. A very important
interesting.
clue, I think. Very intriguing. I am obsessed with the mail service keys because they were never found. And you think they would have been
Yeah.
in the house or they would have been at his job. One of the two. Never
Yeah.
found, despite
Interesting.
extensive searching. Yes, the plot thickens.
Yeah. Got a bit of a mystery
Nothing,
now.
yeah, and nothing else was missing. Not even they had a bag of jewelry and some cash that Laura Johnson, had stashed under the mattress in the second bedroom. That was still there. No one had taken it. But a drawer in that second bedroom was pulled out with some linens piled neatly on the floor beside it. Was that where they got the material to tie her up? I don't know.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
it a red herring that she did to make it look? I
Like
don't know.
somebody was looking for something.
Yeah, right. But like linens piled just really neatly next to the drawer on the floor.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then the only other thing was two cushions had been knocked off the Chesterfield in the living room, which kind of aligns with her story of
Of
waking
her
up
being
kind of
there.
falling off the couch. Yeah. So the police obviously questioned Laura several more times that night, but she couldn't give them much information. She was still at times pretty hysterical, and she couldn't remember seeing anybody. The doctor also examined her as well once they sent um, James off to the hospital. And she said she had a lot of pain and soreness in her back, as well
Oh,
as on the right side of her head. So he didn't find anything on her head, but her back it was red and there was some tenderness under when he touched it, it was really tender and there was some redness. The next day he examined her again, and this now there was bruising and discoloration on her back, and he found some swelling on the right side of her head. There was some swelling the following day, just above her right ear.
okay.
Yeah. So the chief of police also examined her that night. They checked in her all through her hair and on her nightdress for any blood. They found nothing. It was spotless. Not even
Oh,
like nothing in her hair. Like they went all through it, nothing. The only blood they found, there were some tiny specks of blood found on the bandages she was tied up with.
oh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also, interesting clue. right?
Well, yeah.
Was that someone got those bandages after they murdered her husband? Or
Yeah.
they just spots of blood on the linens because they've been used for something before? Is it from
Interesting.
her? Is it from someone else? We don't know, but there were tiny specks of blood, but no blood on her otherwise. Not a single
Yeah,
speck
that's
anywhere.
strange, hey?
None in, yeah, I was thinking like if anywhere it'd be in her hair,
Yeah, well,
right?
yeah.
But no, nothing. Not a drop.
And even if she had somehow gotten dragged out before,
Hmm.
why would it be on the linens and no, that's weird. That's weird.
Unless they tied her up after they knocked her out.
Yeah,
It's like, well, she might wake up. I don't know.
yeah.
It's very intriguing. I wish I had answers for you. I don't. Tiny specks of blood. Like I said, this case, it can go either way. I'm trying to like just lay out the facts without
Yeah,
giving my opinion. But of course, like I do lean a certain way, so I'm trying to be very unbiased in my description of the
yeah.
facts. I'm trying very hard not to be biased, but these are the facts as I've read them.
Yep.
So, of course, as I said, James Johnson immediately taken to City Hospital in Saskatoon, where they performed some surgery on him. He was also tested for narcotics. They found nothing.
Okay.
That will be important later as we discuss this. But no narcotics.
Okay.
Um, None showed up in his system. Laura was not allowed to visit him that night because they were doing the surgery. It was very sensitive. But literally the following day, she was allowed to visit him, and she didn't leave his side until he died on Sunday, January 3rd, 1926, at 2:15 p.m. He passed away. He never woke up, never regained consciousness, and he died from cerebral meningitis that he got from the axe wounds in his head.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yikes.
don't think there would have been much hope for recovery either way. He had
Didn't
eight
sound it. Yeah.
eight wounds in his face and head. Like it was a lot. It was a lot,
Especially in the 20s. Like,
right? With their surgical prowess.
yeah.
I mean, God bless them. They gave it their best
They
shot.
tried. Yeah,
They
they at least
tried.
tried.
And he didn't make it to January 3rd. But never woke up, so they were never able to interview him or get any information from him at all. So, according to Laura Johnson, our only living witness,
Yep.
her husband had arrived home on Christmas morning between 8 and 9 a.m. after working an overnight run with the railway. Sorry. I'm getting excited, so I'm slurring all my words together.
Yep. Get into the good
But
parts.
yeah, I'm like, okay, let's get into it. Okay. But after working an overnight run, he got home between 8 and 9 a.m. She herself had only arrived home at about 7:30 that morning. She'd spent the night at her friend's house, Mrs. Sherville. She had a 16-year-old son from her first marriage. Her first husband had died in the war. But he was away. He's celebrating with a friend on a farm in Kiniston, so he's out of the picture. He's not considered a suspect. He was fully gone. They apparently spent just like a quiet Christmas day together. At one point, she went to her sister's for a short visit. She said lasted no longer than an hour. She was pretty sure that was by her estimate. There's no way it was more than an hour that she was gone. She didn't think either of them had left the house other than that visit to her sister when she went. And she told the coroner at the inquest that her husband had mostly relaxed. He was reading, playing the piano in the Victrola. They had received no visitors, and they had planned to go to a show at the Capitol Theater, but there was a mix-up with the tickets, and they didn't end up going.
Oh,
So, pretty quiet day.
yep.
At 8 p.m., she said her husband remarked on the time and said he was tired, and they went to bed about an hour later at 9 p.m.,
Oh.
and both fell asleep very quickly. This is where I get a little bit like, this timeline is so tight. Oh my God.
Well, yeah, if they were there at 10:40, that's
Yeah,
not very
the call
much.
came through between 10:20 and 10:40,
Yikes.
according to these estimates. Like again, this is everyone's
Yeah.
estimate, so we don't have a good exact timeline, but it's tight
Yeah.
that they were both fast asleep. She said they fell asleep very quickly. They'd each had a few beers over the course of the day. Laura estimated that she'd had four. She thought she had one in the morning, one at lunch, one with supper and one in the evening. Because Christmas, so
Yeah.
morning drinking is allowed.
Yeah. It's
I know,
acceptable.
right? Holiday. According to her, a single beer was enough to make her feel the effects. It would make her a bit tipsy, even just one beer. So I think that's why she thinks they fell asleep so quickly, is
Oh.
they'd had a couple of beers over the day and retired, and he'd worked all night and then stayed up. So I imagine there's also that aspect of it as well, because he didn't go to bed when he got home from his midnight run.
Oh, so he
They
stayed
were
up all
awake.
day. Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, so it could explain why he fell asleep so quickly and fell asleep so deeply that
Yeah.
there's no signs of any struggle at all.
Yeah.
So, um, she was not able to offer any details on what happened between going to bed at 9 and her coming to in the Chesterfield at around 10:20, 10:30. We're not sure. She had no idea how she got there, and she didn't remember seeing anyone or hearing anything, although she vaguely remembered seeing blood on her husband's face, but she wasn't sure when that was, or if she was in bed or at the time or not, or if it was just an impression, if maybe when she was coming to, she looked in the room and maybe saw,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
it's, it sounds a lot like she might have been in a very trauma response.
Yeah.
We don't know. Or, I mean, we don't know. We don't know. Is she
Yeah.
lying? Was she in trauma? Did her brain just black out what happened so that she didn't have to remember it? We don't know.
Yeah.
Only she knows.
Oh yeah, obviously.
So she also claimed that the back door, when she went to the kitchen, the back door was open, but Constable Flavel was sure that they were closed and he opened it. So again, witness testimony,
Versus the
people's
police.
memories are
Yeah.
very faulty.
Yeah.
They could have been open, they could have been closed. She thought they were open. Apparently they'd been married for 4 years, and all the friends of the family, everyone that knew him and knew her, said it was a very happy, very loving marriage. They got along great. Um, but despite that, at the end of the inquest on January 12th, 1926, the coroner, Dr. Desrosiers, stated that he found Laura Johnson's evidence to be unconvincing. The police
Ooh.
arrested her at her sister's house after midnight the same night and took her into custody. The police found her inability to remember more of the evening suspicious, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If it was trauma, then it makes sense.
Yeah.
If she's lying, then we don't know. Specifically, that she couldn't explain how she went from sleeping in bed to coming to on the Chesterfield. And according to them, reef knots were very easy knots to get out of, and she should have had no difficulty escaping them. To them, she should have been able to slip right out.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So, James Johnson also had a number of life insurance policies,
Uh-oh.
all payable to her.
Oh
The
no.
total amount being $17,526, which is worth about $280,000 in today's money, decent amount of money. However, it was noted that Laura Johnson was a woman of means. Her own means. She did not need that money. So she had
Oh.
her own money. She didn't need any money. The other thing is, the axe you remember they found,
Yeah.
according to Dr. Monroe's opinions, the weapon that was used on James had to be very sharp, very, very sharp. To split the nose to the lip without cutting the gum, to just split it so cleanly, it
Oh.
had it to be very sharp and to penetrate as deep as it did in the head. And in his opinion, it had to be larger than a hatchet and probably was a hand axe. And you recall they did find an axe in the home,
Yeah.
but they didn't believe it was the murder weapon. It was very dull, and the blood smear they found on it was from a chicken. They tested it was not human. It was
Oh.
chicken blood. So
Interesting.
they don't think it was the murder weapon. It was really dull, no blood on it except for chicken blood, which if she cleaned the blade from human blood, the chicken blood would have been wiped off as well.
Yeah.
So it didn't really make it. And we know from the bedroom, there was
There's
blood
a lot of
everywhere.
blood. Yeah.
So this axe would have been bloody.
Yeah.
It would have been dirty.
Yeah.
So they don't think that was the murder weapon. The other thing that came to light during the inquest was that one of the witnesses, his name was Benjamin J. Clark. He was a fireman on the CNR Railway. He testified at the preliminary hearing that Laura Johnson's claim that her husband didn't leave the house on Christmas was entirely false.
Ooh.
He'd seen Mr. Johnson at approximately 2:30 p.m. They'd exchanged greetings, and he'd gone inside a cafe to buy cigarettes. When he came out, James Johnson was still there, and he was talking to two men, and he invited him to join them for a Christmas drink.
Ooh.
Yeah, so he agreed to have one beer. He was due at a friend's house at 3 p.m. for dinner, and so the four men went into an apartment in the Tuxedo Block, which I'm not sure where that would be in Saskatoon. I couldn't find it, but it's called the Tuxedo Block. I think it was all bachelor apartments.
Yeah.
To have a drink. Johnson never introduced Clark to the other two men, which is odd. They left together after one beer, and Clark said he found it very odd at the time that Johnson hadn't introduced him. But from the way they spoke, he had the impression that the strangers were also railwaymen. That's what
Oh,
the
okay.
impression he got, but
Yeah.
he never introduced them. He told the court that he got the impression that Johnson didn't really want to have a drink with the two men, but didn't want to insult them by turning down a invitation to have a Christmas beer.
Yeah.
He couldn't give much of a description of the men, only that one was quite dark and the other was about medium, and they were slightly shorter than himself. And he couldn't even tell them what apartment building, like which
Oh my
apartment
goodness.
they'd gone to.
Not a
Couldn't
very
remember.
reliable witness at all.
They did try to go and find these two men, but he couldn't figure out which apartment. He couldn't remember.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah. So in another testimony, Victor Hayes, he was a friend of Johnson who also was a railway mail clerk, and he told the court that 4 days before the attack, Johnson had come to him and asked if any of the suites at the building where he lived were available. He said that Johnson had voiced a fear of living at the 4th Avenue home, but he hadn't given any specifics. Yeah, he specifically asked if any of the suites were available. He was afraid to continue living at the 4th Avenue home, but didn't tell him why.
Ooh, I think this is a good place for us to pause. Because unfortunately, we're out of time. So
Yeah,
we'll talk again next week.
that's right. Stay tuned.
Talk about, what comes next. Thank you for joining us tonight. Join Melanie and me next week when we will continue our conversation about the mystery behind the Axe murder in Saskatoon. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is Katie Kulpa, signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.